So this year we want to dedicate, and I think not that we always dedicate. I think we dedicate all the shiurim, and obviously tonight's one, to the success and the safety of the soldiers on their mission, that they protected in wiping out and eradicating the enemy and keeping Israel safe and returning home safely unscathed, and that the hostages are also released soon. And for their protection, also refer for all the refuim, all the cholim of Klal Yisrael. Okay, just excuse me, two ideas. So this parsha is parsha Beshalach, in which the word shalach, like sholeach, means to send. So Pharaoh, after the Makot Bachorot, after the sin of after the plague of the firstborn, where the firstborn Egypt will die, then that was the last straw for him. He sent them out, but then he still went after them. And I read also in the English of the Parsha, they selected 600 chariots of the finest chariots, like the top of the range, to chase after the Jews who were on foot. And it's like our enemies, Yamach Shemor v'Zichron, spare no expense in trying to wipe out our people and have over history. So he used the finest chariots. Like Hamas gets billions of aids and builds tunnels and gets weapons and starves their own people and terrorizes their own people and spends billions just to intimidate and try kill us, our people, God forbid. So it's there's a pattern there. That hatred doesn't bring rational thinking, and please God, they should all be wiped out, all our enemies, regardless of that they waste their money on trying to defeat us, and they should all be destroyed and eliminated.
Ben, can you teach us a concept? It's important.
And yeah, it's going back to that sometimes people, regardless of what the cost is, they'll do something irrational to prove a point. And even if it's going to bankrupt them or harm them financially, they'll still go ahead with something. And unfortunately, we probably know people who've done this irrational type of behavior, just to prove a point for their own ego. If it's illegal, obviously, it depends if it's something that needs to be done. I mean, it's sometimes people do spare no expense, but for ego of an evil person or evil entity, they don't care. They'll even if they go down themselves, they'll still do it. And as I say, it just shows what our enemies have done in the past and throughout history.
And that's a good point. All right, so we're going to go back to the Gemara. So I think the point that you tried to say, which is good, is that you can create a lot of damage if you just stick to go at proving a point as opposed to looking at consequences of decisions, which I think was a good point. I can learn from that too. So, where we were in the Gemara, we were basically discussing concepts about the difference between the Tana Kamma and Rav Yirmiyah. Because Rav Yirmiyah says that basically there are two different types of loss that the Kohen can put forward onto Levi can put forward onto the Kohen. The one loss would be if the barrel was already tamei, spiritually impure, and afterwards you can't have pure barrels where they weren't infected and give your tamei barrel. Why? Because you cannot keep the superior product and give the inferior product away. That's the same as a hole in the barrel. What we are saying is here, if it happens to be infected by the time it left, in other words, in the possession of the Levi, it got infected, but it was found in Israel inhabitants as opposed to Livium and Kohanim, then if Tameh 1 happens to have a hole in the barrel, it's not worth much anyway, because you can only use Tameh 1 for sprinkling and not for consumption, because you can't ingest anything that has spiritual impurity. However, if it is left uncovered, and and we assume that there's a viper and venom is left, then that's also a problem, because then you can't even use it for sprinkling, and that's a further loss. But once that's sustained, the implication of it having a barrel that's broken means that there's not a huge loss to the cone at all. And that seems right by the Tanna Kamma. According to Rav Yirmiyah, the only time it's permissible to give something that's tameh with a leak in it to the Kohen, if you're Levite, is if the barrel had netting over it, so the leak would be very slow and he would lose a tiny amount, even though the wine has lost value for sprinkling. So Rav Yirmiyah is stricter than a Tanna Kamma. The Tanna Kamma already says wine for sprinkling is a lot of money. So if it's having a leak, there's no major loss to the Kohen. It's not as if the wine is in a pure state and is drinkable where there is a loss. Also said, as far as the olive oil that is in a barrel, if it's tameh, you can't cook and eat with it, but you can certainly keep warm and use it to light a fire, and therefore it's worth a lot. So if that barrel got a hole in, even though it's tameh, because the use is warmth and lighting, then anytime that had a leak, even though you can't eat it because it's tameh, you can't offset that loss from the Levite to the Kohen, unless it hits with Rav Yirmiyah's rule that it's wrapped around the barrel, keeping it from draining out quickly. So the Gemara persists. Everything's well in a case where the barrel became broken for the wine, saved by the netting, is actually fit by use for the Kohen because there's a negligible loss. But where the barrel became uncovered, why is the wine fit? Basically, because liquid that's left uncovered and unattended can't be imbibed, because it's feared what? That a poisonous snake deposited venom while drinking. So what we said is, as far as the venom is concerned, how could it be that the Brisa permits the Levi to designate the contents of the uncovered barrel as Trumas Maisa? Because when none of the wine can be used, saying that the Levi may sanctify it, since its prohibition represents only a minor loss to the Kohen. And the Gemara is proposing, maybe you can say the same thing when you're faced by a robber, since the loss of the coins is not certain, maybe you should be permitted to transfer Maisa Shani sanctity to them. The Gemara says, look, the first thing we have to do is, if you look as far as the uncovered wine is concerned, fit for sprinkling because it's tameh, impure. You can't do it if that wine is left uncovered, because you can't even touch the wine or release wine in your public area in case somebody of the public cuts their foot open and poison is absorbed. Certainly not in your house where there's not enough ventilation, nor can you knead it with clay. In other words, add it and make clay, or whatever the case may be. You can't give it to your animal to drink, or the animal of your fellow. So basically, uncovered beverages are prohibited not only for drinking, but you cannot use it even for sprinkling or any other purpose. It's toxic. And therefore, it's no use at all to the Kohen. So why can the Brisa state that it permits the Levi to designate them as Trumas Maisa? So according to the Tanna Kamma, you've got a slightly different reason, is that at the point where it became unfit for use, if it's got a hole in the barrel, it represents almost no loss to the Kohen. Why the Levi isn't responsible for leaving it uncovered, I don't know. That's a separate issue the Gemara doesn't deal with. But assuming he never left it uncovered, But certainly a hole in the barrel is not going to make a difference. But the Gemara is saying, look, according to a different site, if you want to look at what there's an opinion, because Rav Yirmiyah was talking about netting, but there's a different case with Rav Nehemiah. Basically, you can pass the wine through a strainer, and then you render it permissible. Why? Because if the straining device is subject to the law of uncovered liquids, in other words, the strainer is left uncovered, the wine's forbidden for use. And Rav Nehemiah said, listen, there's a condition. If there's a low receptacle that's covered completely by the filter, even if the upper receptacle is uncovered, the wine in the lower receptacle isn't subject to the laws of uncovered liquids, because any venom of a serpent sits on the surface like a sponge, and it remains in its place. It doesn't pass through the lower filter or the lower receptacle. So therefore it remains uncontaminated. So the Bryce is saying it must be talking about a case where at least there was the bottom filter there. And according to Rav Nehemiah, the Levi is permitted to designate uncovered wine for this as Trumas Maisa, because you can put it through a strainer with a bit of effort. And that's no loss to the Kohen. So we're still talking about Tameh wine. We're saying in addition for it to be Tameh, what happens if it's uncovered and therefore completely prohibited? So the Levi therefore can designate it as Trumas Maisa. But then if you want to compare that to this equation about a robber approaching a Jew and he's got a 50-50 chance of losing his money, he can't transfer Maisa Shani sanctity to the coins. Because if you compare the potential loss represented by a great amount of a 50-50 compared to a small loss, where the wine is not a complete write-off, it can be used for the aroma and a sprinkling, but you can't drink it, then the two do not financially equate. So the Gemara says, listen, you can't necessarily attribute the brisa to Rav Nehemiah, because Rav Simon, not Shimon, we generally deal with Rav Shimon, but this is Rabbi Simon, and he said in the name of Rav Yeshua ben Levi, you only learn this in a case where you didn't mix the wine after it was uncovered. Because if you did, you can't put it through a strainer. It's already toxic. It's only when you're able to separate the layer of the toxin on top and the heavier wine goes underneath. So accordingly, Rav Simon says if the wine was left uncovered in a barrel and you pour it in a strainer, even Rav Nehemiah is going to say the wine's forbidden. So it's going to be thoroughly intermixed. Okay, the diluted venom is going to pass easily through the filter and it's going to be toxic. You can't even touch it. So the Gemara is saying, what would Rav Nehemiah do in terms of his leniency? So the Gemara says, look, there is a possibility of using a filtering cloth on the opening of the barrel and to slowly pour out the wine, even if you've got the upper receptacle missing, as long as the lower receptacle isn't missing. And in addition to that, you use a filtering cloth once there's already a bit of mixing. I personally would drink of that wine, but they're saying it seems to be okay. And then there's another objection according to the brisa that's put forward to Rav Nehemiah. And this is that according to Rav Nehemiah, do we separate truma from tamei produce upon tamei produce? So what's this tamei produce amongst tamei produce? So we're saying the first tamei produce comes from the Israelite. The second tamei produce is when the Israelite gives his 10% of truma to the Levi, and then the Levi takes that 10% and gives his share to the Kohen. So that's one upon one from an Israelite to a Levi, one from a Levi to a Kohen. So therefore it uses that word upon, to show that there's different layers of contribution. So it's been taught in a brisa that we may separate truma or trumas maisa from that which is tameh, impure, upon that which is impure, and from that which is pure upon that which is pure. and from that which is tahor upon that which is tameh. You can separate that which is pure from that which is toxic. So apparently, in that case, how is it going to be? If it's toxic from the source, how would it be toxic not for the lady? Very simple. When you took it from the Israelite, it was pure, it was tahor, and then the Israelite's portion became tameh. So that's allowed, but you can't take tameh produce from that which is tahor. In other words, the Israelite can't give something that's got spiritual impurity from the 10 barrels, and he keeps the 9 barrels that are pure. Now, Rav Nechemia says they didn't permit one to separate truma even from that which is tameh upon that which is tameh. So what it's saying is that with the Israelites it was impure, and then when the Israelite gave his 10% to the Levi, it's impure. And according to Rav Nechemia, you can't give that to the Kohen, except in the case of demai. So let me explain to you what this demai concept is. It's basically produce, and it's uncertain whether Misa has been taken. So, in other words, in a certain point of Jewish history, Jews were quite scrupulous in separating Truma, but many of the Amaritz, which is like the commoners, common folk, they were pretty careless regarding Misa. And therefore, if you're purchasing produce from somebody that's a little bit ignorant in Torah law, then you have to first separate the various tasks, because you don't know if it's been given away. And in that case, that might be a bit of a problem. So what we are saying is, it could or could not be separated. We don't know when we're dealing with somebody that's ignorant. But in that particular case, what we're saying is Rav Nechemia said there's a leniency. There's a leniency that you can take impure product from a client can take an impure product from a Levi if the impure product originally came from the Israelite, only in the case of demai where we don't know if tithings were separated prior. In other words, it could have been halachically, so this is an extra stringency. But in a case where for sure was not, you can't, because we can't make the Kohen, according to Rav Nechemia, in a state of spiritual impurity. So we can see that Rav Nechemia doesn't permit produce to be designated as truma or trumas mais upon other tameh produce. Now, our brisa permits a Levi to designate tameh wine as trumas mais upon other tameh wine. So we are saying there's two different opinions. The Bava Kamma, the general rabbinic opinion, is that you are permitted as a Levi to designate tameh wine as trumas mais and give it to the Kohen, if it came from one that was already tameh, from the Israelite. So we're saying then, well, how do we have this resolution that is attributed to Rav Nechemia, who says that you can't do it? So the Gemara answers, it's got to be a case where the produce is Damon, which is it's questionable as to whether when you bought it, it was separated from Misa or not. And therefore, there's certain leniencies that apply. So Rav Nechemia agrees that in the case of demai, tameh produce may be designated as trumas ma'aser from other tameh produce. So all we are saying is, guys, we're talking about if the barrel has a leak, how much loss is there to the Kohen if the product isn't worth a lot to start with. Now, one of the things is what you cannot, it's not just about leakage. So in other words, if the barrel has a hole in, and there's going to be a definite loss to the Kohen or to a Levi. The Israelite can't give it to a Levi, and the Levi can't give it to a Kohen. It's only if it's lost significant value because it's tameh, or it's in a state of uncoveredness where it's physically laden with toxin. And as I said, even if oil is tameh, you can still use it for heating and lighting, and therefore, if it's got a hole in the barrel, you can't give it, unless, according to Rav Yirmiyah, there's netting where it's a very slow leakage. So what we are saying is here is slightly is that in a case where you don't have a hole in the barrel, I'm going to give you another case, but you've got 10 barrels as an Israelite, and one of those barrels are inferior because either the wine has gotten off, or it's not as qualitative high as the other 9 barrels, or it's not worth as much as the other 9 barrels. You cannot give your most inferior barrel to the Levite at all. And the same for the Levite to the Kohen. In fact, one should be able to give the most superior, but we at least probably say that the mean average is what you give. So the Gemara quotes the final clause of the Brisa, and it says, look, there's Tamei barrels of table wine, and the master, which is the Bava Kamma, said, if the barrels contain oil, you can't designate the oil in a broken barrel as Trumas Maisa upon the other 9 from the Israelites, because of the loss to the Kohen. For the reason we explained is that even though it's Tuma, you can still have heat and light with it, even though you can't cook food with it. So there's a differentiation between wine and oil, but you can, as a Levi, designate the broken barrel of Tamei wine as Trumas Maisa because it's worth a very low amount just to sprinkle, and therefore if it's a broken barrel, the loss is minimal. It's just not worth anything at the point that it became Tamei or sprinkling. So we're saying that at the end of the day, there is a bit of a question, because where we're saying that sprinkling wine isn't as significant in terms of value as drinking wine. You can't say that, because there's a brisa that comes in. Rav Shmuel said in the name of Rav Chia, look, when it comes to drinking wine, you only have to spend a selah per log. But when we sprinkle, even from wine that costs 2 sellers per log, you can see that when there's a limitation of funds, it seems to be that you can spend double the money on sprinkling wine for aromatizing your home as opposed to drinking wine. Okay? And Kevin, we call it a cellar of wine, because it comes from a wine cellar, you see? I thought you'd like that. Thought of Kevin.
He's enjoying it.
Yeah, cellar's a measurement, but Kevin's enjoying the joke nonetheless.
SCLA, not C, and when if he sells it, then he's
Damon,
also a
you
seller.
mean to say, Damon, you mean to say the seller of wine is the seller of wine keeps it in the cellar.
Exactly.
The measurements, yes.
And you're a very
SCLA, yeah.
Okay.
And you just the sellout.
Oh,
Yeah.
Kevin, I didn't deserve that.
No, who said I was speaking to you? I was talking to Arthur. Could have been talking to anyone.
That's why.
No,
that's why people stay happily married, because they, yeah. Right. Okay.
This is a joke. Carry on. I was just trying to keep Kevin awake. That's all.
Okay. And therefore, there shall be no more drinking at this year. So, guys, what we were saying in essence is that sprinkling wine is worth a low amount of money compared to drinking wine. And therefore, if there's a hole in the barrel, the Levi can give it to the Kohen because it's already lost most of its value. And what this discussion is, from Shmuel, who said in the name of Rav Chia, is that if you've got limited funds, you actually have to spend more money on your sprinkling wine of 2 selah as opposed to half the amount if you're using it to drink. So obviously, then that seems to be proving there's a great benefit in sprinkling wine, and it has got its value. So it should be forbidden to designate it as a Tamei wine, as Trumas Maisa to the Kohen from the Levi. And the Gemara says no. You've got to know what we're dealing with here. We're not dealing with new wine. We're dealing with wine that has aged. So in other words, if you want to have wine with aromatic flavoring to release in your house, what you are doing is you're creating wine that's very old and it's got a very significant smell, like maybe oak or smokiness or something that's going to create an amazing aroma for the home. But that's not new wine. And the reason why you're paying twice the amount for sprinkling wine is that that wine has taken years to develop that particular olfactory scent. And therefore, that loss would be significant. But when you're dealing with new wine and it becomes spiritually impure, tuma, in a state of tame, it's now worth only the amount for sprinkling. And because it hasn't aged, it basically isn't worth a lot. So that Gemara doesn't hold water. Okay. So what we are saying is here, the loss isn't significant. So the Gemara says, well, what happens if the wine is fit to be aged? Maybe you should just let it age, and then it can be suitable for sprinkling, and therefore its loss does constitute a serious financial setback for the Kohen. So Kevin, as a Levi, gives me his one barrel of wine, and he keeps 9. I've got it. Now that became spiritually impure in my possession, or it became spiritually impure in Kevin's, and he's given me part of his tameh, and it's tameh, because tameh can be infected with me as a Levi or with Kevin from the source of the Israelite. But I can't, the Gemara is saying, well, maybe I can't give it to Gavin as the Cohen, because if Gavin lets that barrel of wine age, then that value is quite high for sprinkling, even though it's tameh and he cannot drink it, because it will develop a special aroma. Therefore, if that barrel has a hole in, I can't give that to Gavin. I've got to make sure he gets a barrel where there's not a lot of financial setback. And the Gemara is saying, listen, you can't do that because there's this issue of an unwitted transgression. What do we mean? Is that the Kohen himself is forbidden to age the wine, because we say that it's possible that if it remains in his wine cellar for an extended period of time, you're going to unthinkingly partake of it, and you violate the prohibition against consumption of truma that is tameh. And since Gavin has to serve in the temple, he cannot be in a state of impurity, and the truma has to be of purity. So you can't age the wine, Gavin, and obviously develop the value and have value accrue to it as it develops a sense, because it's too risky for you to keep it on your premises because you might forget. And therefore, that means that the loss is not a serious one. Okay? Now, we've still got a bit of time. Don't worry, I'm going as quickly as I can. But in the case of oil too, it's saying maybe you've got tameh truma oil that you're going to come by to maybe cook with it, you know? So why can you keep that? And the Gemara sometimes is somehow not really worried about the fact that you're going to come to cook with it. And we're saying, well, why? Well, they're saying the reason why is that you put it in that oil in a repugnant vessel. In other words, you put it in a vessel that actually smells like, say you had those old Castrol, not Ronnie Castrol, he also stinks, but the other Castrol, remember the oil? You had the
Castrol motor oil.
Yeah. So they say
GTX.
if you get a barrel of oil, you need to put that particular oil in a container that stinks of diesel, so you'll never come to cook with it. So then you're safe. Why don't you put it in a repugnant vessel that keeps you safe? You're not going to accidentally partake in it and cook of it. So it says, well, why don't you do that for the wine when you're sprinkling? Because Gavin as a Kohen won't come to confuse it with drinking wine. And the reason is, if you put it in a repugnant vessel, wine, it's going to actually absorb the smell of whatever was in that container, and it's going to destroy the aroma. And the whole reason you're aging the wine is for the unique aroma that the wine is going to give. So the point of it is, if you put it in any normal vessel, Gavin as a Kohen could accidentally partake in it and become tameh from the truma, and he can't as a Kohen. You can't put it in a repugnant vessel because then it's going to kill the aroma to let it age for using it for sprinkling. So it's not going to accrue value. And since it's not old aged wine, it's not worth a lot. And therefore, as a Levi, if it's got a hole in its barrel, I can give it to Gavin because Gavin's not losing a lot of money. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through. We've got approximately 5 minutes left, but I want Gavin to be able to actually go to do some work with Dustin, etc., so we can end off in this note. I'm not going to tell you how it's a tonight dispute now.
Damon. So
Yeah.
if the wine, so the point is, yeah, if the wine or the oil becomes tame, that the owner incurs a loss. Is that what you
No.
alluding to also?
What I'm saying is, if it becomes tame, Gavin
Yes.
can't. As a Levi, I can, if it has a hole in the barrel, give it to Gavin. Because if it's tame, Gavin can't drink from it anyway. Therefore, the wine has lost most of its value. If it afterwards
Yeah.
develops a hole in the barrel, and we're using tame wine where, let's just say you as the Levi, Kevin, all of your you as the Israelite, all of your barrels are infected with tame. I'm taking one of your 10 barrels. It's good, it's impure. I can give it to Gavin if it develops a hole in it, because that tame barrel isn't worth a lot. He can only use it for sprinkling. And it's not worth twice the amount of drinking wine because it's not aged or developed wine. So if it develops a hole in the barrel, I can give it to Gavin. However, if the wine is Chivas Regal or wine of top quality and it hasn't become spiritually impure, Gavin can consume it as a Kohen, as Truma. And therefore, if it has a hole in it, I can't let Gavin have that loss as a Levi because it's a substantial loss. Therefore, that's my problem. It's the same thing with the oil. If that barrel of oil becomes tame, Gavin can use it for cooking or to light lamps, etc. And even though they can't cook with it, it's worth a lot of money. So if it becomes tame, but there's a hole in the barrel, Gavin can't sustain that loss because he's losing a lot of money from the hole in the barrel. So the focal point here is the hole in the barrel. The only time you can give a hole in the barrel is when the contents are not worth a lot of money because they've been ruined in some way. That's what either there's poison or alternatively it's impure and you can't consume it. That's where a lot of the value goes. You get what I'm saying, except for oil, where you can have it for other uses. That's all. So we're just talking about risk is proportional to value also. Okay, guys, let's end of tonight. I wish you a good night.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Good night.
guys.
Thank you. Well done.